Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 553 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories. Publishers Weekly says, visceral settings and robust characters will have readers marveling at how much Kirtley is able to fit into a limited page count. For SFF fans with no time to sink into a doorstopper, these concentrated doses of genre goodness will hit the spot. And Kirkus Reviews writes, Kirtley employs sharp, concise prose that complements his puckish sense of humor. The author's passionate voice breathes life into this wonderful array of tales. So again, the book is called Save Me Please and Other Stories, and it's available now on Amazon.com. And today on the show, we'll be discussing the movies Scanners, Videodrome, The Fly, Existenz, and Crimes of the Future, all of which were written and directed by David Cronenberg, who was our guest back in episode 125. And this will include spoilers for all of those movies, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 31st appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown, and she's currently a writer for Pixelberry Studios. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Good to be back, Dave.
Then next up, we've got Matthew Kressel, also making his 31st appearance on the show. His novel Queen of Static, the follow-up to his groundbreaking novel King of Shards, is available now, and he recently launched a newsletter of writing advice at outerdeep.substack.com. Together with Ellen Datlow, he hosts the monthly fantastic fiction reading series in New York City. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Good to be back.
And also joining us today is Tom Gerencer, making his 29th appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Galaxy's Edge, and in books such as New Voices in Science Fiction. He's the author of the business book Think Like Google, and the short story collection Intergalactic Refrigerator Repairmen Seldom Carry Cash. And his popular science book How It's Made, written for the Discovery Channel, is out now. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Really happy to be here again.
Okay, so let's start off with Andrea. And have you tell us about your history watching David Cronenberg movies?
I actually don't have much of a history of watching Cronenberg movies. My first experience of Cronenberg movies was The Fly. I think probably I saw it when it first came out. I was a teenager, but that was pretty much it. And I have to admit that I was kind of like, maybe I shouldn't do this panel because I'm not into body horror. But then I was like, you know what? I'll try it. I haven't seen The Fly in years, and how bad could it be? And it's pretty gruesome to watch. So you kind of like solidified my dislike of body horror. That aside, I think all of them are really interesting science fiction premises and stories. So I did appreciate that. But yeah, just personally for me, things blowing up and gross stuff it isn't my taste. But
had you seen, because he has like actually we're not going to talk about them really today, but he has a bunch of movies that like History of Violence or
yeah, I'd never seen it. I looked up his all of his movies. I hadn't seen anything but The Fly. Oh no, I'm sorry. Didn't Tom? You said he made Dead Zone.
Yeah, he directed The Dead Zone. Yeah,
yeah, which is also actually one of my favorite movies. But that's it. That's all I'd seen: The Fly and Dead Zone.
But you remember The Fly being really gross, or like how much?
I remember it being gross, but I think because I was a teenager at the time, it was just like, oh, this is fun, you know.
Okay,
I've sort of shaded my view of what's fun in the intervening 40 years.
Well, so how about Matt? What's your history watching David Cronenberg movies?
So I've seen The Fly many times, and I used to watch this movie all the time. Anytime it was on TV, I was like, I got to watch The Fly. I wasn't like a huge David Cronenberg fan like some people, and I wasn't like an anti-fan either. It was just like, oh yeah, that's just another director. But I know some people get really obsessive about his films. So I was aware of his work, and I definitely had seen Existenz before, or at least like most of it. And Scanners, when it came out, I was 7, and I remember it being on HBO a few times, and it scared the hell out. I couldn't watch it. If it came on, I had to change the channel. It was just like, just something about the tension of that, of the way it's shot, just freaked me out. And I know for a fact that I had seen parts of Videodrome, because like some of those scenes are super familiar to me, but I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through. And I've certainly seen some other Cronenberg films. I'm trying to remember specific ones right now, but it was interesting to like watch these all the way through. Some of them for the first time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge Cronenberg expert either. I mean, the first movie of his, I heard about The Fly when it came out because it was a big hit movie. But back then I was too scared really to watch most horror movies. So I just assumed it would be too scary for me. So I never watched it at that time. And I think the first one of his that I actually watched was Existenz, which came out when I was in college. And I liked it. I liked it pretty well. I mean, other people told me like, oh, this is not as good as his earlier movies. So I went back and watched Scanners and Videodrome. And I think maybe that's it. So those are the ones I had seen. And then I had watched, actually I'd seen The Dead Zone as a kid, and I loved that. And History of Violence, I think is really good as well. For this panel, we're talking about the ones that are the most science fictional, in my opinion, and the ones that he was the writer on. So like The Dead Zone is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, and like Naked Lunch is an adaptation of a William S. Burroughs novel. And The Fly is technically an adaptation of a short story, but he changed it so much that it has almost nothing to do with the short story. So
it's also based on an old movie from the 50s.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, if you're curious, that's why we're talking about these specific movies, is because they're the ones that he wrote that are the most science fictional. But how about Tom? What's your history with David Cronenberg?
So I have a good long history with David Cronenberg, and I didn't, reading your article, Dave, based on your interview with him on Geek's Guide, and reading all the different titles of movies that he had created was kind of like listening to one of those like, introspectives on a certain band that you like never knew you loved every single one of their songs.
Yeah.
So I was reading that and I was like, holy crap, he made that and he made that and he made that. And I always just thought he was like a niche kind of body horror guy. But then just like seeing his whole catalog listed out like that, I was like, this guy is so versatile. And I'm really impressed by like how much of a true genius he is, but how much of a true like workhorse and craftsman he is as well. But so that was part of my experience, was realizing that, holy cow, he made all these movies. But the other part of it was when I was young, my best friend since I was 2 lived around the corner from me and is one of those David Cronenberg like obsessive fans. And he introduced me to, well, first of all, Scanners in like right when it came out. And I actually watched Videodrome off of like a pirated HBO channel with like the static over it, kind of like it was like this self-referential thing watching that. Yep. But I watched it like that. And my friend Greg, he showed me, I never had watched the whole movie of Videodrome, but he had shown me several scenes like, you got to check this out. This scene where this guy like puts a gun into his like stomach. It's so crazy. You just got to watch it. And I'd watch it and be like, gross. That is like disturbing. But he loved all those movies, and and my other friends would like quote Scanners and talk about Scanners. And I never had seen the whole movie, but I'd seen pieces and parts. And I had, I knew the story just by my friends like talking about it so much. And then, every time a new Cronenberg film would come out, my friend Greg would be like, oh, you gotta you got to check out Existenz. It's a new film by Cronenberg. It's really awesome. And so I'd go watch it. But that's kind of been my history of it. I've been, introduced to it by a lot of people who are really big fans of his. And I really now, like through watching these movies and reading your article, just have developed this completely new respect for the guy.
Yeah, I mean, if people haven't listened to my interview, again, it's in episode 125, and it's also, there's a transcript. I think it's on Nightmare Magazine. David Cronenberg is an incredibly smart guy. I mean, he's talking about Sartre and Heidegger, just, off the top of his head and stuff like that. I mean, so it's much different than a lot of other Hollywood directors that you might talk to. I mean, and he actually, his initial ambition was to be a novelist. And he just sort of like fell into filmmaking by happenstance. But he has a very like novelistic intellectual sensibility. But so let's talk about Scanners, which is the earliest of these movies that we watched. So Andrea, having never seen Scanners before, kind of what were your initial impressions of it?
Well, watching it felt to me very much like a first movie. There's a lot of wide shots of big corporate buildings and, some of the specifically the main character is kind of flat.
I would say he's more than kind of flat.
I was trying to be nice.
He's just flat.
He's flat. But everything else about it, like, the Patrick McGoohan and Michael Ironsides they always deliver, and they're both so engrossing and great to watch. I could watch anything, but overall the story is fantastic. Like, honestly, I'm watching this and I'm like, how has nobody ever remade this? Because I really think you could get more in depth. Because I felt like it was engrossing, but I felt like the big reveal that they are brothers and that the Patrick McGoohan character is their father was just dumped on us instead of like seeing it dramatized. So I would have liked to have seen that. So I actually would really love to see a remake of it. Actually, as a more mature, in-depth film.
Let me just give a little context for this, because this is interesting. So David Cronenberg is Canadian. And at this time, there was somehow the Canadian government, they were really making a big push to like build up the Canadian film industry. And so they would basically pay you to make a movie. They would give you a tax exemption for the whole production cost of the movie. But because of for some reason having to do with that, this movie had to go into production in 2 weeks after they got approval of this grant, basically. And so at that time, they didn't even have a script. They just had 12 pages of notes about what the story was going to be. Wow. And so David Cronenberg was like writing the script each morning before they filmed it. So if the movie seems a little on the underdeveloped side, that's a big reason why.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. But I mean, just like, I enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting and cool. And, just off the top of my head, the whole drug that affects pregnant women, that totally leans into the whole thalidomide thing. Did anybody else think of that?
Oh yeah,
for sure, yeah.
It was clearly influenced by that, but I would love to see a remake of that, like a more mature version of it.
I guess I didn't say the basic premise is that you have basically like battling telepaths, and they can kill each other with the power of their minds, and they're sort of like competing groups trying to control this power and use it for their own ends and stuff like that. So how about Matt? What was your initial take on this movie?
So the first 10 minutes of the movie, I realized why this movie scared the hell out of me as a kid. So, there's that scene where they're doing the psychic demonstration with the group of like secretive corporate executives in some kind of auditorium. And then the one guy who's supposed to be doing the read actually gets like the tables turned on him. And then Michael Ironsides basically explodes his head. and this just like freaked me out even now. I'm like, holy shit, because I had no memory of that. But then I'm like, oh, this is why this movie scared the hell out of me. So I like there's some kind of there's a tension to the film. There's a kind of like Cronenberg has this way of making like a sunny afternoon terrifying. And it reminds me a lot of some of John Carpenter's work, especially this movie. There was just some kind of like this sinister science fictional aspect to it that I really liked. I love Michael Ironside. I also think that so many films and TV shows borrowed from scanners. And the most obvious one is Stranger Things, right? So with like, when you use your psychic powers, you get a bloody nose. I mean, that's like, it's also, you know, a fire starter too, but you could just see how later media just copied or stole from this basically. I liked it. I felt like, Andrea, that there were certain pacing and storytelling elements that didn't quite work, but I could see the all the pieces were there. So, you know, I'm in a writer's group and it felt first drafty, but I was like, oh, it's so close. Like if you had just fixed these few things, it could have been really great. So that to me, you know, I was okay with it. I was willing to overlook that. And, you know, there was a couple ridiculous things, like he could use his mind to, like, the computer is a nervous system, so you can use your brain to hack into the computer. And I was like, oh, is that really established? I don't know. It didn't quite work for me. But I definitely got like a kind of Theodore Sturgeon More Than Human thing, you know, building kind of a super race of people. And I definitely love the reveal that they were brothers. I did not see that coming. You know, yeah, I mean, I had a few issues with the main character. I forget the character's name.
Cameron
Vale.
Yeah, Cameron Vale, who's like, you know, basically like this homeless, mentally ill guy who you know, 2 scenes later is like hacking into a corporate computer and like, you know, walking around as this, you know, clean cut businessman without any difficulty whatsoever. And I was like, okay, come on. But I was willing to overlook a lot of that stuff. Yeah, I thought it was enjoyable.
And how about Tom? What was it like for you finally watching this all the way through?
I really was impressed by it. I really thought, you know, like Andrea and Matt have pointed out, there's some flaws and some immaturities with the writing based on what you said. They had to rush it. They had to rush the writing quite a bit. I can't even believe it's as good as it is when you tell me, you know, how it came about. But I think it just has such a gripping, memorable concept to it that is followed through with a really strong story and so many absolutely psychologically, viscerally memorable scenes and images in it that it's absolutely a classic. I mean, I look back on it now, like I was in 6th grade when this came out. Everybody in my junior high was talking about it. Everybody was quoting it. Everybody was saying, "I'm going to suck your brain dry." And I had not seen that until later. My friend Greg showed me that scene. I was like, holy crap, that is horrifying. And the scene where the guy's head explodes, like everybody talked about that for years and years and years. And it's still to this day, if I think of the word scanners, even if I'm, you know, thinking of like something that has nothing to do with the movie, I will picture that guy's head blowing up. And
every time
and
you're scanning a document.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much. If the word scanners pops up in any line, like when I'm reading something, I picture that guy's head blowing up. I'm just like, you can't forget some of this stuff. And it's just, he just did such a good job of tapping into your unconscious and you know, into your psyche, into the deeper parts of your psyche in this literally haunting way where you can't stop. It just keeps coming back. I have nothing but respect. I think the main character, I think the fault there was probably with the actor. I think, you know, maybe it's tough to measure up to the other actors that he was playing against, but I think he just felt a little kind of wooden to me, his performances. But overall, I just think it's a fantastic, just shocking, astonishing, absolutely memorable movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that I understand the actor, he retired from acting sometime after this and I think he became a fairly successful like playwright or something like that.
Oh, wow.
But maybe acting just wasn't his thing. But I do think that David Cronenberg often writes scripts that are like, there's tons of dialogue and lots of abstract ideas and stuff. So I can imagine it's not necessarily the easiest thing for an actor to make it seem natural because it is so sort of intellectualized, everything.
But if this felt a lot less intellectual than his other stuff, there wasn't any big philosophical monologues like there are in the other ones. I think he was, I mean, all due respect to that man, he was not a good actor. Like, it was the problem. Because, you know, like Michael Ironsides and Patrick McGoohan were hitting it out of the park. I mean, you really can't go wrong with... They're sensational
actors, though.
Exactly. Well, Michael Ironsides is pretty much like the 80s go-to actor for like cold villain.
Oh, yeah.
Murderous villain.
He's terrifying.
The other thing I want to say about Scanners is that I think that what really makes this movie is the sound design. The sound design is so good. And it really, you know, when there's the telepathic battles and everything, I think it's really the sound design that is making it work so well. And there's the scene where there's like this sort of like cult or like, you know, hippie group of telepaths or something. And they're all like communing, and there's this like overlapping voices of everything they're saying. And just the audio experience of listening to that is so striking.
Yeah, that part is extremely haunting. You know, when they're all communicating and then like the group comes in and just blows them away. You know, it's like, you know, like David Cronenberg's like, he doesn't care. He's like, no, we're gonna kill everybody.
Yeah. So any final thoughts on Scanners before we move on?
This might be a little off track, sorry, but did anybody else in the meeting right at the beginning notice that somebody said something about dolphin espionage? There was this line about dolphin espionage.
Yes.
Does anybody remember a movie called Day of the Dolphin? Is that a reference to that movie?
No.
Well, that was the U.S. military was using dolphins, right?
It was a movie about that. Yeah, so it's like really referencing something very obscure about like espionage.
Well, I feel like it's a big thing in science fiction, like Hitchhiker's Guide and some of it and stuff of like dolphins being smart and telepathic and stuff like that. So I think
what did the CEO say? He was like, "Oh, we're developing women like perfume and military weapons."
Yeah, it was so weird. That conversation was so odd.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of odd conversations, let's move on to Videodrome.
Yes.
So Matt, what was your? I guess I'll say this movie defies synopsis, but basically, James Woods is a creepy TV executive who's always looking for the most titillating sort of material to boost his ratings, and he finds this show called Videodrome, and he starts pirating it and putting it on the air, he's at least talking about putting it on the air. And Videodrome is just this weird show where there's like people being like sort of in sexual situations being tortured. And he gets drawn into this increasingly bizarre conspiracy involving sex and television and weird hallucinations and different like factions fighting to control the culture and stuff like that. So Matt, what was your initial impression of Videodrome?
So this movie is both amazing and horrifying at the same time. It's like it's got. I actually think the story in this is better than Scanners. I think that it's all there, and you just kind of have to follow pretty closely. So you know, I haven't seen Debbie Harry in anything else as far as I can recall, and I thought she was great in this. And James Woods, of course, and like so the thing that I've realized with Cronenberg is his stuff is very hallucinatory, and if you kind of step back a little bit from the plot and just kind of go like moment to moment, those like set pieces work much better than when you try to slap the narrative together, because at some point you're so far into the hallucination, you don't know if it's real or not. You don't know whether to take that scene seriously with regards to the plot. My take is that everything that he's seeing that's surreal is an hallucination caused by this signal from the video that he's watched, and they're somehow embedding some kind of message in the video to control him. And then once he's done his thing, once he's proved his usefulness, then they just control him to kill himself using the voice of the woman he loves, Nikki Brand, Debbie Harry. So that part I thought worked really well.
Actually, let me jump in there because I forgot to mention. Yeah, so he has this girlfriend who she wants him to like cut her with a knife or something like that as a erotic thing, and I think didn't they say at the end that she had died before the story started, and so
no,
okay.
No, she died after she went to Videodrome to try to be on it. They killed her, but before they killed her, they used her. They recorded her saying stuff for him so that she could seduce him after she was dead.
Yes. So what Bianca Oblivion, the daughter of Brian Oblivion, the one who invented the Videodrome signal, says that in order to elicit the hallucinations, you have to shock people. And one of the ways they discovered to shock people was by these horrific snuff films. So that's what the Videodrome signal that he pirated was. It was these horrific snuff films. And by the way, there's a trigger warning. There's so much violence in this, like people cutting each other and just like it's crazy, crazy violent. And I thought it's actually this comes up every few years. It was a thing in the 80s, and it was a thing, with video games in the 90s. And so it's like this fear that media is somehow corrupting people's morals. And I thought that aspect of it was really relevant. It was like, here's a guy who just doesn't, give a crap, and he's, doesn't care about the moral ramifications of what he's doing. And then he himself gets corrupted by something that's even more disgusting than what he's doing. And that, I thought that aspect of it worked well. And, one of the things that I think is Cronenberg's strength is that he's consistent with his own vision. He sticks to his vision no matter what, even if it's like so off the rails, like someone would be like, you shouldn't do that. Why would you do that? And he does it and somehow comes out the other side. And you're like, holy crap, that was crazy. I don't know what I just saw, but it was like amazing and horrific. And like a lot of stuff today, Marvel movies, there's so many producers and executives that are watering stuff down. At the end of the day, you get this sort of thing that's it's fun, it's entertaining, but it just sort of lacks a director's vision. And I feel like Cronenberg, absolutely, this is 100% his vision, and I respect him for that. Does it work 100%? No, but I enjoyed it for what it was.
Well, and this movie has more like unforgettable original visual images than probably any other movie I can think of. Like the gun coming out of
shocking. The TV screen as like a giant breast screen with her mouth on it, and he shoves his head in. Like that effect, that's a real effect that they created. It wasn't, it's not, they didn't have CGI back then. It's just astounding.
Yeah.
The like flesh vagina in his stomach that videotapes, like VHS tapes, get inserted into.
It was astounding. So many images.
So Andrea, as someone who's not that into body horror, how did you respond to video?
There was a lot of cringing going on, a lot of just kind of like watching the screen between my fingers. But yes, it definitely solidified that I do not like watching really gross stuff like stuffing tapes into your stomach or a gun that's attached to your hand in a slimy way. But the thing about this movie was one, yes, the incredible images that he creates. Like I was sitting there watching, like, what could it have been like watching this when it first came out? Like we're, our brains are wired for CG, and this must have been so outrageous and at the time that it must have been, it had to be so much more shocking than
I feel like if this came out today, I'd still be like, holy shit, I can't believe they made that movie, you know?
But I think that's from a perspective of, I can't believe this got past like a bunch of executives,
Right.
as opposed to that image is like, how did they do that kind of way, you know? It must have been shocking to see like those like him, you know, the sticking his face in the breast and the hand and the stomach. Like I was actually sitting there going, how the fuck did they do that? You know, with this is all practical effects. None of this is video, you know, none of this is CG.
So Tom, you said that you watched certain scenes of this?
Yeah, my friend Greg had recorded them off a pirated HBO signal with with the static over it and everything. So exactly. And he showed me the gun in the stomach scene. I had not seen the breast TV scene, which Andrea, you just asked, like, how the heck did they do that? They actually made an inflatable
kind of what I figured,
TV screen, and they projected the image onto it. They made an inflatable screen and projected the image onto it, and then he shoved his head into it. And he said, I think it was, I was hard to understand. I was reading this online and it said it was made out of like dental dam material. Ugh. So he said that he said it was actually, it felt like a giant breast. So I don't,
kind of latex, I guess.
Yeah. But I was just, to me, watching this movie was like a transformative experience. It was more than just a movie to me. Did you say he also made the movie Crash?
Yes. I didn't say that, I don't think, but he did, yeah.
I won't digress on that at all, except to say that I had the same feeling after I got done watching that movie. It was more than a movie to me. It was a transformative, possibly life-altering experience. And I did not know until I read your article that that was also him. But when I watched this movie, first of all, I think his writing is very similar to yours, Dave, in a lot of ways. I think there's a lot of brutality and just unflinching honesty in your stuff that I see in his stuff as well, that I was like, man, these guys are like kindred spirits. But I also thought like he has this like perfect character. Like we talked at Clarion about how like the perfect character, and you've always hammered this home to me, Dave, the perfect character is somebody who has this like deeply held belief that is then going to be challenged by the story. And they start right off by putting him in the talk show. And by the way, I apologize if I'm kind of off with my answer. I actually died 3 weeks ago and I recorded my responses. So like, if you haven't watched the movie Brian Oblivion, you find out later he actually died like decades before the movie started. And he's just a bunch of like, he just recorded so much of himself that you can still kind of interact with him. But I thought this movie, he starts out on the talk show at the beginning with Deborah Harry, Blondie, like this awesome superstar from my youth. He starts out on this talk show with her talking about whether or not what he does, this porn stuff that he does and this, depraved kind of TV station that he runs is hurting people. And he says, no, it's not hurting people. And the presenter says, don't you care? And he goes, no, of course I care. He goes, look, what I'm doing is giving people a harmless way to express their base desires. And you really get the feeling that he believes that. He's not just BSing the audience. And then the movie then sets out to shove that in his face and go, okay, let's see. Is it harmless? Because I think the theme of the movie, I don't think anyone's going to argue with me, is, look, if you are what you eat, if you eat a bunch of junk food, you become junk food. If you eat a bunch of healthy food, you become healthy food. We have to realize that, TV being this massive cultural wave in the 80s, when suddenly everybody was watching TV all the time, Cronenberg was questioning that and saying, you are what you eat visually and mentally too. We're not sitting around reading. Go ahead.
I think you could read it another way because, Cronenberg is basically the James Woods character in a way, because at this point, he's already made a bunch of incredibly violent sexual movies. And so I think he's playing a little game where he's like, okay, let's take this idea that TV violence causes real life violence and play it out to its logical conclusion. This is the kind of stuff that would be happening. You don't see this happening, ergo, TV violence doesn't cause this, because what I'm showing you in this movie is so like exaggerated and fantastical and not realistic. But if you actually believed that was, if you took that premise, this is what reality would actually look like.
I don't agree. I don't think Cronenberg is as overt as that. I think he's more like he takes in things from what he observes and then he plays them out. Almost like the character in another movie we're going to talk about grows these organs inside himself and doesn't know like how he's doing it or why. He just knows like he consumes things and then this other stuff comes out of him. And I think Cronenberg has a lot of craft, but I also think there's an element of him when he creates, it seems like he just says, look, I'm going to respect whatever's going on in my subconscious and not try to.
I think he's just following his id.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
But to finish off what I thought about the movie, I really did think the movie is making a point about, look, you are what you consume and you think it's harmless, but is it really harmless? And look at, if you're always consuming this stuff, it's going to have space in your brain and in your subconscious. You're letting it in and it is then going to come out in other ways later. And I don't think he's trying to say like, if you watch TV, you're going to pull a gun out of your stomach and kill people. I don't think he's saying that, but I think he's saying, hey, you probably ought to think about this. You probably ought to think about what you're consuming and curate it. And I actually walked away from this movie thinking, I think I want to curate what I consume more. I think I want to pay more attention to, if I'm going to watch this thing, is it going to be good for me or not? Or is it going to be
no more David Cronenberg movies?
It might be
exactly
like
the opposite is true. I think exactly the opposite, Dave. I think more David Cronenberg movies because those movies are, I would argue, very good for you because they're going to make you examine yourself and make you look and see, like, what am I doing?
Okay,
but I want to
get Andrea. Andrea,
please,
did you want to say something?
Specifically about that conversation?
I thought I just heard you trying to get into the.
No, I was just no, I wasn't. I have something to say, but you guys continue with that conversation, and I'll just add my little addendum at the end.
Okay, Matt.
I just wanted to say, like, I feel as if this could be. I don't know David Cronenberg at all, but I feel like this could be his own sort of personal exploration of his own subconscious. Whereas, like, he absorbed a lot of these very, very violent body horror films. And then like, okay, what did that do to my psyche? Well, it made me want to create these really crazy, violent, like, it just seems that it could, it's just theory of mine, but.
And Dave, I'm not trying to say like, oh, David Cronenberg is trying to say we should censor TV because it's bad for you. I don't think that's what he's trying to say at all. And that's not what I'm taking away from it. What I'm taking away from it is less of a political, like, let's control other people type of thing. And more of a, like, watching this movie, I feel like you should come away thinking, I should maybe not just, and it's so much more real today. Like, I should maybe not just, to finish that thought, I should maybe not just, consume whatever they put in front of me. And it's so much more real today. Like, there's so many prophetic images in this. The image of all the people sitting in the cubicles each with a TV in front of their face is so much like modern office space. But back then, we did not have that. There was not a bunch of people sitting in cubicles with computer screens in front of them because we didn't have computer screens. So that was like a prophecy to me. That was like, that's what we're going to have. And then think about it, if it was true back then that you have to be careful what you consume, what about now? We have taken what we started off with in the 80s with TV, and we have now exponentially increased it with social media and with all the media that we have now, our phones being glued. Like, I can't imagine the movie he would make now if it was a young David Cronenberg observing our society now.
I just, we would have to ask David Cronenberg, I guess, but I just think it is possible to read this as a satire of the idea that people just sort of mindlessly imitate whatever they see on television.
Sure.
But we need to move on. But Andrea, what was your addendum there?
Well, everybody's looking for messages, and I didn't really take a message away from this. I think maybe because I kind of like removed myself from it because the images were so horrific for me. But what I did, like, looking at it from a filmmaker's perspective, I just found, first of all, I just want to say that I think a lot of Cronenberg's genius is in his casting. He cast the perfect people for his roles, like James Woods, is perfect for that role. He just looks sleazy. He acts sleazy. And he's the perfect person for that. That fast talking, sleazy grifter who who allows the story to get the better of him. You set him up. There's this one scene where he's pulling out his gun and he opens up the gun and it's like, the thing that it made me think of is like, oh, he's a tough guy. He's got a gun, but then he doesn't know how it works and it like falls apart in his hands. It's like perfect metaphor for the whole thing. Like he thinks he's a tough guy. Oh, well, here you go. And Debbie Harry, who is, the purely a sexual creature cast in this horrific role as someone who's into, sexual torture. I think you're right, Matt, that I don't think she was in anything else. But I certainly remember her from this. I knew she was in it. I hadn't seen the movie, but I knew she was in it. So he like just takes somebody and just cast them in the perfect role. And I looking forward to all the other movies we're going to talk about. It's the same for all the other movies. He just is a genius in casting the perfect person for the perfect role.
Yeah. So I think this is a spectacular movie. This is actually my favorite of the 5. I mean, but it's the kind of movie you watch, you're like, oh my God, I got to show this to somebody, and say, have you seen this? And it's just so different. Like even decades later, it's so different than anything else.
Yeah.
Like it's just such an accomplishment, in my opinion. Like somebody was saying, like, I think toward the end, it could maybe be a little bit more, tighter or coherent or something.
Coherent is the word I would use. Yeah.
But just you just can't match its overall just like mind fucking impact. So yeah. But let's move on to our next movie, The Fly. So Tom, overall thoughts on The Fly?
Yeah, it's a great movie. I saw it when I was in high school. I saw it in the theater and was blown away by it then, and was like, "Oh, it's such a great reimagining." Because I had seen the 1950s or 1960s movie,
58.
that it's based 58 that it's based on, or that it was loosely based on, and I was like, "Oh, they're going to update that. Cool. I bet they'll do a good job." And I was just like, "Holy shit! I did not expect that. That is astounding." And growing up in the AIDS epidemic and seeing this, it was almost obviously a merger of the Fly movie and the AIDS epidemic, and watching that play out on the screen, and Jeff Goldblum just shining in that role. I think that was the first role where he wasn't like a supporting guy and he was like a lead, and everybody was like, "Holy crap, that guy can really act. He can carry a whole movie." Yeah. And it was just such a cool, like the relationship between him and Gina Davis is just it feels so real and fun and good. And then you watch it just dismantle. And then the visceral body horror kind of grossness of it is at the same time funny and horrifying. And I don't know, it has always stuck with me. In fact, I had a virus when I was 19 that took away like 40% of my gum tissue, and I was spitting out chunks of my gums, and I was trying to have some sort of sense of humor about it. And I would talk to my friends and I would go, "Hey, Fly got into the telepod chamber." And I would quote parts of that movie. I don't know. It just sticks with you. He's just brilliant. I agree. Videodrome is the better of all of it, is the best of all these movies we watched, but still The Fly is, he made he can make an awesome indie movie. He can make a blockbuster movie. The guy I just think he can do anything.
Yeah, well, I mean, The Fly has the highest rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I think it made the most money and has been seen by the most number of people. So, I mean, it's a perfectly, reasonable choice for your favorite Cronenberg movie. I just happen to prefer Videodrome, but this is really good.
Videodrome is my favorite as well. Sorry.
Yeah. I guess so the premise, if you don't know, is basically there's a scientist played by Jeff Goldblum, and he's doing experiments with teleportation where he has these two like phone booth kind of things, and he's teleporting objects from one to the other, and he teleports himself, and it seems to work, but it turns out that a little housefly has gotten into the pod with him, and so the computer has mixed his DNA with the fly's DNA, and he starts mutating into a fly monster. And I mean, obviously, like as a kid, though I hadn't seen this movie, I knew what the basic premise was. But I got halfway through the movie and I was like, I had to stop it because I was like, I like these characters so much. I don't know if I can bear to watch what I know is going to happen. And so I think that's the mark of a really good movie where you feel that strongly about the characters. But so Andrea, what do you think about the Fly?
Well, I remember as a kid watching the original one from the 50s and being scared of it. So I remember being excited to see a remake of it. And I haven't seen the original in probably 50 years. I remember being scared of it, but I'm sure it was not anything like this in the visceral body parts falling off way.
Well, actually, let me just say about the original. So it's different in that the scientist instantly gets the head and arm of a fly.
Right.
He doesn't go through stages of transformation and stuff. And so it has this incredible final image where you see the little fly in a spider's web with a human head and a human arm screaming as he's being eaten by a spider.
And he says, kill me, right? And that
kill
line,
me,
kill
that's
me,
right.
that has been repurposed.
Help me.
Help me.
No, I think he says kill me. And that line has been repurposed through like every comedy series over the years. The Simpsons and what is it? Family Guy has used it, and it pops up everywhere. Kill me. He definitely says kill me.
Okay. But I was shocked at how horrifying that is for a movie from 1958.
Yeah. Like I said, it scared the crap out of me. But this was it's the same story, but it's a completely different interpretation of it. And again, I'm coming at this. I felt the need to sit back and remove because of the horrifying images I knew that were going to come. And indeed, the pulling out of the teeth and the fingernails was just horrific. But like I said, he is amazing at casting, and Jeff Goldblum is just perfect for this role. His expressive face and his eyes just lend itself to mutating into something really gross and creepy, which is what happened.
Speaking of the casting, so it's Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis are the two lead characters. And I didn't even know that they were in a relationship at this time, but just watching this movie, I was like, they must have actually been in a relationship. Their chemistry is just so true, And so, they did get married, or they were dating at the time. They subsequently got married. So, but I just felt like that came through so strongly.
Yeah. But he's so he's not your typical leading man. So it's just so funny to see him as a leading role. And also, boy, buff Jeff Goldblum. Good Lord.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, I loved it in a gross out teenage kind of way.
Yeah. How about Matt?
I love this movie. Of the five we watched, this is my favorite. I saw this a lot of times. This was one of the shows that one of the films that anytime it was on TV, I watched it through to the end. And going back to it now, I was afraid the suck fairy would come, or the suck fly, I should say, come and ruin it. But no, I actually thought it held up really well. It was really well paced, and I just thought the transition from of Seth Brundle, of Jeff Goldblum's character, from this kind of nerdy, confident but sort of shy guy who is clearly attracted to this woman, to this insane murderous fly creature. It was so gradual and perfect that it was fantastic. I had forgotten, I remembered thinking oh yeah, that was kind of gross. I forgot a lot of the body horror, where he vomits on the guy's hand and it dissolves.
Oh, that is so...
The arm wrestling in the bar when he breaks the guy's arm and the bone pops. This, I'm oh right, I forgot about that. Oh my God. The body horror was, of course, grotesque, but somehow it managed to do it in a way that it didn't feel superfluous or gratuitous. It just felt like it worked with the story. Yeah. And then I thought that obviously it's science fiction and hypothetical and not real. But I thought like the way they presented it, like, you know, he's going to revolutionize, like he gets motion sickness. And I thought that was a great thing. Like, that's why he invented this teleportation thing, because he gets motion sick in a car, in a train, in an airplane. He can't, you know, he just gets sick in a car. So he's going to, you know, he's brilliant. He's going to invent this machine that people can transport one place to another without moving. And then a fly happens to get in there, and the computer's so smart that it merges their DNA. Like that's really a cool concept.
I actually thought, Matt, it was interesting how he says, you know, I'm not even the smart one. I just have like sort of subcontracted all the different pieces of the project out to the really brilliant people.
I thought that was him being self-deprecating. I think, you know, yeah, like he didn't build all those individual parts, but he bought them and connected everything up. I mean,
but it was just a little bit more plausible than in most like mad scientist kind of situations.
That's right. That was a really cool trick that Cronenberg used. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, how is this guy in his you know giant studio apartment, like building this machine? It's like, well, he's just buying parts from everywhere, and then apparently, like, he wasn't quiet about it when Gina Davis's boss was like, I did some research and actually, you know, found a lot of backstory on him. So he was like clearly saying stuff to people, and no one believed him, you know. But I thought that the premise was cool. I thought that you know, this movie was 86, and I thought that the practical effects were really great, including like the teleportation machines themselves. Very much reminded me of like the Alien.
The
sort of
smoke.
Yeah.
And it's an egg shape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just this is my favorite by far of the films we watched. And it's a classic.
Yeah. I'll just say, like, I feel like this is, you know, if you've never seen a Cronenberg film before, this is the one to watch. It's the most accessible and like crowd pleasing and everything.
That's right.
Probably the most, definitely the most consistent. I just feel like I've seen like a fair number of movies that are sort of similar to this in some way. Whereas Videodrome, like, I've never seen anything like that. So that gives Videodrome the edge for me. But I totally understand if anyone likes The Fly better.
One last comment on body horror in this. I had a friend back when it came out, and I try to see this every time I rewatch the movie. I try to see if I can spot this, but he said, "Did you notice his penis in the medicine cabinet?" And I don't know if it, like, I've looked and I'm like, there's a lot of stuff in the medicine cabinet, and maybe, but I think they didn't want to make it overt, but I think there's a fair chance that they did try to allude to that.
Yeah, because parts of his body are falling off, and he's saving them in his
collecting them.
cabinet.
Yeah,
right.
Well,
that seems like that's probably like
look.
a prop guy joke that they just you know wasn't supposed to necessarily be noticed. I don't know. I'll just say the other thing I found really striking about this movie is that the sort of like douchey, stalkerish ex-boyfriend kind of becomes the hero at the end of the movie.
Yes.
So cool. Yeah. Such a cool twist.
So you have like the really sweet, nice guy turns into the monster, and the douchey guy ends up being the hero at the end, which I can't remember ever seeing a movie where that happens before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another guy. That's another actor who plays that exact role in every movie he's in. Just a douchebag.
Yeah. I think they use that trope, that switch in The Hills Have Eyes, or I think that's the name of it. There's a horror movie where that happens too. The douchey guy at the beginning ends up being the hero, and it's kind of a thrilling transformation.
I have seen that, but I don't remember how it ends. But all right. So any final thoughts on The Fly?
Yes, this was mentioned to me today, but David Cronenberg is the gynecologist who gives birth to the maggot baby, which I didn't know.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so he's actually done a fair amount of acting in sort of small roles. I mean, he was actually in Star Trek Discovery. He had a fairly large part on that, but he like pops up, you know, not infrequently in different TV shows and stuff like that as an actor. All right, cool. Let's move on to Existenz. So this is, like I said, this was the first Cronenberg movie I saw, and the premise is that there is a brilliant game designer, and she's like she's doing like a focus group for her new game, which involves sort of like plugging yourself into these weird biological like game unit things and entering a virtual, you know, a sort of virtual reality hallucination thing that seems completely indistinguishable from reality. And so someone tries to assassinate her because there's like this faction called the Realists, and they think that these games are destroying reality or perverting reality or something. And so she goes on the run with Jude Law, who's like a PR guy or something like that. And they have to sort of, survive in this. And again, there's all these conspiracies and different factions fighting over what should be a reality. And there's different levels of reality and twists and stuff like that. So Andrea, overall, or what were your initial impressions of Existenz?
Well, just as a film, I thought this was my favorite. I may be in the minority here, but I found it really interesting, just in its sort of prescience about gameplay and virtual reality. Because virtual reality wasn't really much of a thing at the time. It was 99, maybe not so
there was
much.
There was a whole spate of VR movies. This came out a couple months after The Matrix, so it was definitely in the air.
Well, they were making the same at the time. They were made at the same time. But I just again, I kind of felt like the casting, it really works here, is just because Jude Law is just so young and is just the perfect newbie kid for this role. And Jennifer Jason Leigh is the sort of know-it-all is not the word, but the expert, which is a role she plays well. My first thought, sorry, this is kind of going off. My first thought was when she walks in and everybody claps, I was like, oh, a room full of men clapping for a woman game designer. That is science fiction. But I really enjoyed it. I just thought that the story itself hung together really well for me. And I liked the world that they create and the dynamic between the two characters. This was the first movie I watched in the series where I actually gagged. Specifically the scene where they eat the food, where he eats the food in the Chinese restaurant was horrific. But and they talk about like the NPCs and how they move while they're waiting for the dialogue. I really enjoyed this one. I kind of put everything down and really watched it.
Well, and you're like writing for games now, so maybe that
probably
had a little extra kind of.
Probably, yes.
Because I think that when I first watched this, I thought there was a lot to like in it, but just like when they go into the Existenz game itself, I feel like it just gets kind of dumb to me, and I agree. I like the ending, but I just feel like Existenz, as it's presented, doesn't seem like a good game. It doesn't seem like interesting to watch or to play. And I just feel like if they just made that part more compelling, I feel like the overall structure of the story is pretty interesting. But it's just sort of drags for me in the sort of 3/4 of the way through the movie. But so Tom, you agree with that?
Yeah, I thought it was a really cool movie. Again, my friend Greg, best friend since I was 2, he told me to watch this movie years ago, and I did, and I kind of had forgotten about it, and then watched it again for this panel. And I thought that it was really cool. I thought it had a lot of really cool ideas, and like all Cronenberg movies, had a lot of very memorable, viscerally shaking, scenes and moments in it. But I thought the internal logic of the game itself wasn't there. It was just like, oh, you're doing this because your character wants to do it. And I'm like, okay, but even when you're playing a game, there's a reason your character does something. It's not just because your character wants to do it in the game. There's motivations, and if the game is well written, it's got, there's reasons that the character is doing things, and those weren't I didn't feel like those were explored. It was just like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to do this now because my character wants to do it, even though I don't understand why. I just have this strong feeling that I should do it. So that kind of made it harder for me to enjoy it. I think just like you said, I think once they were inside the game, I didn't get. I guess because I've played a lot of video games, I'm just like, well, no, the game has to have some kind of internal structure to it.
Yeah, especially since this is presented to us as being like the new project from this genius game designer. It just doesn't seem like a good game. I don't know if that's, quibbling or not, but that I just get sort of bored during that part of the movie both times I've watched it. But how about Matt? What do you think of Existenz?
Again, I really respect Cronenberg's persistence of his vision. He has a vision and he sticks to it. I agree that I didn't feel that the in-game narrative was strong enough, was compelling enough to drive the plot forward. But like each individual scenes were like so visceral and real and gross that I won't ever forget them. I think like Cronenberg probably invented a new genre that I would call like biopunk. It's like technology with biology. It's sort of H.R. Geiger-esque. And like it was very much on display in this, specifically like I will never forget the scene and like Andrew said in the Chinese restaurant where he's taking apart the pieces, and then you realize, oh, that's the same gun that the guy shot Jennifer Jason Leigh with earlier in the film, and like there's all these little callbacks that keep going on, like, oh, that part we saw that little piece earlier, and just like little attention to details that were totally grotesque but worked, where like Jude Law has like sticks his tongue in Jennifer Jason Leigh's port in the back of her, and then like they're like he has to put on the little chapstick thing on the port before they stick the bio. Like it was just so weird and like gross, and it's like you could see where it's like Cronenberg is playing with these like the grotesqueness of body parts, but also like all mixed in with like weird sexual stuff. And it like the whole idea of like what's real, to this degree, I think, definitely was Black Mirror before Black Mirror. Like Black Mirror, like some of the episodes totally, ripped this off. Obviously it's not original to this. The Matrix was before this, etc. But I feel like this one really took that idea of like VR taking over reality to a different level. And I love, like Andrew said earlier, like Cronenberg is so great with casting. Like William Dafoe is the gas station attendant. Like it's just so perfect. Like he's just this crazy guy who, of course, he happens to have, this giant pneumatic pump that can insert this bioport into your body. Like it's just sitting there next to the greasy tools in his mechanic shop. And then, I think Jennifer Jason Leigh or William Dafoe says, "What do you worry about? They do it in shopping malls now." It's like,
right. It's like getting a piercing done.
Yeah.
Like getting a piercing. And the one thing I will say that I really enjoyed about it as a writer is that Jude Law and Jennifer Jason Leigh are very aware of the narrative of the story. So they comment on the narrative. They have this meta narrative. Well, I think we're supposed to do this. Aren't we supposed to go here? And I thought that was very clever because it's not something that you see a lot in films where people are like aware of like the so-called plot beats. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I like that. I appreciate that. So I my main issue is that like from scene to scene, I wasn't sure what the narrative drive wasn't necessarily like what they wanted in each scene. Like the scenes, like individually they work, but like they didn't have enough connecting threads for me. But I do really appreciate the overall attempt of the film. So overall, I think it worked, but it's not like parts of it that are flawed.
Yeah. I just want to explain, if anyone hasn't seen it, that this gun we're talking about, it's made out of like bones and gristle and stuff, and it fires human teeth as its bullets, which is one of the things I really, really like about this movie. I just think that's so cool. I want to say so I don't know if you guys know the Perky Pat reference? Does everyone get that?
Mm-mm.
No.
So there's a part where I think they've gotten like hamburgers or something from a place called Perky Pat's. And so that's a reference to the Philip K. Dick novel, The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, which is one of my favorite.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Favorite Philip K. Dick books. And it's basically about people who take this drug, and it and you sort of like enter this like hallucination when you take this drug, and you keep thinking that it's worn off, but you're always still inside the hallucination. Like no matter how many times you think it's worn off, you're always still trapped inside it. And so the idea of like at the ends of like, are we still in the idea is like once you've entered some reality that's indistinguishable from reality, then how do you ever know if you've gotten out of it or not?
Right.
so that's sort of like, it's sort of swiped that theme from Philip K. Dick.
I feel like it's also predates the so-called simulation hypothesis, right? So that like there, that we're all living in a simulation. Like, how do you know? And I think that was one of the interesting philosophical questions of the film.
Yeah. So the other thing I really like about it is that, so at the end, what happens is that the characters like get out of like the real world, so-called, and it turns out that what we thought was the real world, or what was presented as the real world anyway, was a different game. And so they're in a different focus group testing this different game called Transcendence. And then the Jude Law and Jennifer Jason Leigh characters assassinate the game designer. And so that's the other thing I think is really cool, is that the themes of assassinating a game designer that popped up inside the game were influenced by what was going on outside the game and what was in their minds as they were playing the game. So that's the other thing I've always really loved about this movie, and that's stuck with me.
And I love how like the British actors play with act with the American accents when they're in the game, but then when they're out of the game, they have their birth accent or whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, because I don't think Christopher Eccleston can really do an American
it was terrible
accent. He sounded like when people do that
bad New York
accent, bad New York accent. Yeah,
but that was the joke, right? Is that their accents weren't good? Like that was
right. Yeah.
Yeah, they talked about that. They're like, I didn't think that guy's accent was very good.
Yeah.
So yeah, any other thoughts on Existenz?
Nope.
Yeah. All right. So I mean, I think it's like I think it really got overshadowed by The Matrix. It was a big financial disaster. I think I have it here. It was it made $2.9 million on a $15 million budget. And so after this, Cronenberg had significantly more difficulty financing movies where he wrote the screenplay. And so you see he did a bunch of movies after this where there were adaptations or where other people had written the screenplay. And so he had a big hit with A History of Violence. But that was, it was adapted from a graphic novel. So then he did Crash and a bunch of other stuff like Tom mentioned, and didn't really do anything more in the horror science fiction genre for 23 years. And his most recent film, which came out in 2022, is called Crimes of the Future. And this is a script. Apparently he had written it before Existenz and sort of tried to, spent 20 years trying to get it financed. It was supposed to be with I think Nicolas Cage at one point, but that kind of fell through. The version that came out. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Was somebody going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, regarding Existenz and Crimes of the Future, one thing I noticed about Cronenberg was that even though he's talking about technology, oftentimes the technology is not like what we think of as technology. We don't see like computers and flashing lights. We see oftentimes it's biological or just sort of in the background, which I thought was very interesting. You don't really see that take in a lot of film and TV and media.
Yeah, I mean, he is sort of, one of his signatures is this sort of weird science fiction technology that shows up in a lot of his films, and that is sort of, I can't think of a lot of other films that have things like that in it. But yeah, so Crimes of the Future is very, very weird. In a lot of ways, it's sort of like he's taken stuff from throughout his career and sort of mashed them together into one movie. But so basically there's two main ideas in the movie. And one is that in the future, for some reason, people no longer feel pain and no longer get infections and are growing random new organs in their bodies. And so it's kind of become a thing because they can't feel pain, they all sort of cut each other in this erotic way, sort of like we saw with the character in Videodrome, but it's the whole society is all into that now. So that was one of the ideas. And then, what was the other? Is that there's this idea that because the future is so polluted, that there's this faction that is sort of genetic or like doing surgery, I guess, to make it so that they can eat plastic candy bars that are made out of toxic waste. And so rather than trying to fix the environment, they're going to adapt themselves to survive in this polluted, horrible future wastelands. Mm-hmm. So the movie kind of explores those two ideas. Matt, initial impressions of Crimes of the Future.
Okay. This is a horrifying movie. So I have to say, like, some of the visual elements of this film are like, they're stuck in my head forever. I'm never going to forget them. They're so creepy and brilliantly creepy. So like, just a couple examples. When we first see Viggo Mortensen's like creche or bed or whatever that's like hanging from the ceiling, and you see it from a distance, and it's like looks like sort of this cockroach shaped thing upside down hanging, and the light coming through the window, and it's sort of subtly moving, and you're like, what the hell is that? Like that, I'm like, what is that? That's going to be sticking in my mind. And then when like Viggo Mortensen is eating, and he's in this kind of weird chair that's made out of bones that is like moving his body around, presumably to minimize the pain that he feels from all these surgeries. Like that was just terrifying and creepy. And then I thought it was really, really bold of the film to start with the murder of a child.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. Like, you're
by his mom.
By his mom, who straddles him in a weirdly sexual way while she does it. So like there's this weird thing in Cronenberg films where it's like sexual horror, like this weird mix of like sex and horror, and like just the scene where the kid is like eating plastic and he's like drooling, and then you see the mother's horror at this, and like I was repulsed, and I think you're supposed to be. And then like some of the scenes where like they cut out from his body the organs that have like the tattoos on them, and just the whole kind of it reminded me a little bit of like Terry Gilliam, like Brazil, like this sort of weirdly bleak dystopian,
very much
gray world. Like, it's like a technology, but again, there's no like the hardware is like BioWare. It's physical. It's grotesquely physical. There's no like computers or wires or flashing lights. And that part of it is crazy. And then, the scenes where they're dissecting the body for entertainment and everyone's like watching it. It had a very Eyes Wide Shut feel to me, like almost like a secret society that's watching this very horrible thing happen, and it's titillating for them. The story itself, though, I didn't feel that the story itself was compelling. And in fact, that about halfway or 2/3 of the way through, I was like thoroughly bored with the plot. The plot just didn't carry it through to me. But like, I thought that all the acting in this was really strong, and like, I just was having a hard time like imagining David Cronenberg pitching this to Viggo Mortensen, like, okay, you're going to be laying in like this weird bed, and it's going to be moving around because you're in pain from all these surgeries, and then someone's going to be cutting you open with bone saws, like not actual saws to cut bone, but saws made out of bone, and like just I can't quite imagine how it was pitched to any of the actors.
Well, what you said, Matt, I mean, like that was kind of my like, it's a movie with like a mother murders a child, people get drills put in their head, there's at least 2 nude scenes, there's like all this stuff. But the overall impression to me was I just found it really hard to sit through the whole thing because I was so bored. And it's just so weird that there could be so much stuff that you would think would grab your attention, and yet the pacing just somehow feels so like or so just so like
slow.
It's like molasses. Like wading through molasses pacing. Andrea.
Well, I everything that Matt said. It was the most opaque of the films. I was trying to pay attention just to figure out what was going on, but
the story was, as you said, very uninteresting. I didn't feel any connection to the characters, but I was fascinated by them. And I think that's probably just because of the great performances. Like Kristen Stewart as this creepy little woman in a government office is great. Like you can't take your eyes off of her. And you know, I said I gagged in Existenz when he eats the thing, the weird animals. That was nothing on watching the little boy eat the plastic pail. That was really horrific. Just absolutely, I absolutely put my hand over my mouth and had to stop myself from throwing up in the living room. Yeah, everything about this was horrific. You know, intentionally, that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to horrify you. But as far as a movie goes and as far as a story goes, I kept trying to disconnect, or I was disconnecting from it because it wasn't compelling as a story.
Yeah. Tom, overall thoughts?
I had a moment when the mother was killing her son where I almost had to I very nearly turned it off and told you I'm sorry I couldn't watch the rest of the movie. As a dad, it was really friggin', I had to look away and I saw it start happening and I was like, I can't friggin' watch this. And it really, really was profoundly disturbing to me. Beyond just like, hey, I'm watching a movie and there's some weird, gross stuff happening. It was like horrifying to watch. Really bothered me. Didn't turn it off because I thought, no, I'm going to take one for the team here. I might not feel good for a couple of days, but I'm going to watch this movie. And I sat through the rest of it and I was shaken by how profoundly disturbing the movie is. I read some trivia on David Cronenberg that he was distraught when, Videodrome wasn't a commercial. It was a big commercial failure. And so was Scanners. And I'm like, well, is he trying to have a commercial success?
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine, that the audience for this movie is very large. But, I watched through the whole thing. I thought the characters were absolutely repulsive. I didn't find anything to like about most of them. I thought they were fascinating, like Andrea said. I thought Kristen Stewart's performance was astounding. I had seen her I tried to watch Twilight years ago when it came out because I liked Harry Potter. And I was like, I can't understand this. She does not know how to act. But then watching this, I was like, wow, she learned how to act because that was an astounding performance. And then I followed it all the way through the end. And I actually had a moment at the end of it clicked for me at the very last scene when he finally gives up. The movie is about Viggo Mortensen's character, who's this artist who grows, like, instead of, creating something with his hands or with his brain, he actually creates new organs with his body. And he does it kind of half subconsciously or mostly subconsciously, where he doesn't know how he does. People are like, how do you do it? And he's like, I don't know. And it's just like, it strikes me as that's like an amalgam for David Cronenberg. People probably ask him all the time, how does this stuff come out of you? And he's probably like, I don't know. It just comes out of me. And he's fighting, that character is fighting the whole movie, trying to say, like, I'm trying to eat like a normal person. I want to eat like a normal person. And he finally lets go and realizes I am not a normal person. I need to eat what I'm supposed to eat, which is this repulsive plastic toxic waste stuff. And when he finally lets go and does that, he's just like, oh, everything makes sense. And there's this cool like visual effect they do on his face with light and with color, where I felt it. I felt like, oh, he finally like stopped fighting who he was and accepted who he was, and everything's okay, even though it's this horrible, horrible world. And that felt good to me. I don't know if I needed to watch through all that stuff that I watched through to get there. I feel like it could have been maybe a different, I did not enjoy, and I would not recommend that anybody put themselves through this brutal experience of watching this movie. But I came away from the movie thinking, this guy is absolutely still a genius, David Cronenberg. He made what he wanted to make, and it works for what it is. It's one of those movies that's absolute genius, but to me, still absolutely repulsive. I don't want to ever witness it again.
I think this is really only for hardcore David Cronenberg fans, and some of them have raved about it. So I mean, it does have its admirers. But yeah, it's definitely not for the average film goer. I mean, it did, this was a $27 million budget and made $4.6 million at the box office. And wow. I just can't imagine who thought this would recoup a $27 million just from reading the script. Like, how would you think that this was going to recoup a $27 million budget? But I do agree, Tom, that I got a little more excited toward the end, or what's the word? Like, I sort of perked up a little bit toward the end. I thought the last 20 minutes or so were kind of more
engaging.
More engaging, yeah. I don't know. I can mention a couple of things I liked about the movie. I mean, I think the idea of the people adapting themselves to eat the toxic waste is a cool idea. I mean, I don't know if David Cronenberg ever read Paolo Bacigalupi, but it sort of reminds me of Paolo Bacigalupi's story, The People of Sand and Slag, which is one of my favorite science fiction short stories. So I think that's a cool idea. And there was some striking, again, with Cronenberg, there were some striking images in here, like there's a scene where Viggo Mortensen and Lea Seydoux are sort of embracing nude while this, auto dock kind of machine is cutting at them.
Yeah.
I thought that was a cool image. And then there's this artist who sews his eyes and mouth shut and covers his body and ears and does like an interpretive dance. And I thought that was a cool image. So there were things like that in the movie that I liked, but I feel like it's just overall, it's just like so expository. It's just dialogue, and the dialogue is so expository, while at the same time not really making clear what's going on at all.
Right.
So it's sort of like the worst of both worlds, that it's just characters explaining things, but you're still not really sure what's going on.
Yeah, I actually had to look up what, just to solidify my ideas of it's what I thought what I thought it meant. Okay, that is what I thought it meant. But I frequently felt lost trying to listen to the dialogue and understand what they were talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, I watched this and then I read tons of commentary on it, and then I watched it again, and so and then I read some more commentary on it. So, but the second time I watched it, I was like, okay, now I understand what's going on, but I don't see how anyone could possibly put this together the first time through. It's just like so much, there's just so much world building being thrown at you all at once. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is like, you don't know, like there's a part where Viggo Mortensen is talking to the mother who murdered the son. Mm-hmm. And he says, if we were to do an autopsy on the son, what would we find inside? And she says, outer space. And it's like, what? Like,
yeah,
there's like so much stuff, like even still doesn't make sense to me. And you don't know whether it's literal or figurative, or the character's just weird, or the world's weird, or like, I don't know. Matt, any other thoughts?
A statement like that, I remember that statement very vividly. And I just thought, like, Cronenberg, I feel like he's a lot of times he's operating on this kind of subconscious level, and he just wants to sort of throw out all these things, and like it gets you on this visceral subconscious level, like outer space, like what does that even mean? And then of course all of our minds are going off on this crazy tangent wondering about that, and that's what he wants. Like I think that's what he does a lot, is he just creates these little hints of greater weirdness that he doesn't always explain. And that creates this overall larger picture of this world. The narrative, I think that's like his weakest part is the narrative. Mm.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like Cronenberg, like Tom was saying, he did exactly what he set out to do. It's like, this kind of reminds me of The Phantom Menace or Southland Tales or Synecdoche, New York, where the filmmaker clearly had a vision and did exactly what they wanted to do, and it sort of leaves me cold or doesn't really connect with me. But it's not like it's aiming for something and didn't achieve it. Like, this is exactly what he had. This is my sense, and especially since he spent 20 years trying to get this made. This is exactly what he had in his head, and now it's on film for people who it does connect with.
Yeah. I mean, you have to respect it as a work of art, and it is grotesquely beautiful. But I respect you, David, for sitting through it twice.
Yeah, it's just
Like
shocking.
the first time, I'm like, that's enough.
Yeah.
I don't think I want to see that again.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't have a problem with the body horror, like all that kind of stuff. Like Videodrome, I loved. You know, I just feel like I think Andrea was saying, just it has like so little. This movie has so little narrative drive, and Viggo Mortensen is such a passive character, and it's basically just people come and like explain stuff to him, and he just sort of sits there and, you know, is educated about whatever ideas David Cronenberg wants to play with, you know, and so it just feels so like static.
It's almost like you were just saying that it made me kind of think like he's going for some kind of noir detective, science fiction noir detective thing, because there's this mystery of what's going on, but it never quite gets there because he is so passive and everything is through dialogue. Like, because there is a noir feel to it a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess also, like, I feel like this movie could really use, like, a Blade Runner-style title card to set up some of the world building right at the start, because otherwise the characters have to talk about it. And I just think it's a problem to have, like, all this stuff, like, for some reason, people don't feel pain anymore. You know, for some reason, there's no more infections, you know?
Yeah. It was all set up, but when they go to the office for the first time, and that guy just explains the whole thing in a giant monologue, and it was just like, what?
But I mean, I just feel like it would be better if there was some reason.
Oh yeah. No, I agree.
Like he explains, it's explained as a fact, but it's not explained as an explanation.
Why? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just evolution, but then the government doesn't want you to know it's evolution. Okay. But then you're never really told that either. You sort of kind of have to come to that conclusion, is that the government, whatever shadowy government there is trying to hide the fact that humans are evolving.
Yeah, so I just feel like if there was a title card at the beginning that said, in the future, people are evolving to do this, and, well, you know, infections don't exist anymore because of this or whatever, and then we can, okay, let's get on with the characters, and we don't have to explain that in the scene, you know. So that's crime. Any other thoughts on Crimes of the Future? Yeah,
I think they should rename it "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Plastic."
Yeah.
All right. Let me see. What else did I got on my notes here? Also, this is kind of fun. So this is just a little thing in The Fly, but there's a part in The Fly where the Gina Davis character, you know, she's a correspondent for the fictional Particle magazine. And she pitches this teleportation story to her editor, and he thinks it's a hoax, and so he doesn't want it. And she's like, well, maybe I'll take it to Omni magazine instead.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Omni was huge.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah, if people don't know, Omni was a real science and science fiction magazine. And the science fiction was edited by Ellen Datlow, who Matt Kressel does the KGB fantastic fiction reading series with.
Oh, wow.
And and I think like William Gibson, I think she published, Omni was what made him big.
Oh yeah.
But I think it had millions of subscribers. It was all sort of funded by Bob Guccione's Hustler magazine empire.
It was a gorgeous magazine.
Yeah,
it was like big, fat, glossy thing with
Yep. I had a subscription to it at the time myself.
I didn't, but I used to go to my high school library had a subscription, and I used to wait every month. I'd be like, oh, I got to go see the next Omni issue and read the stories in it, and it was cool.
Yeah, so just the idea that a science fiction magazine would be so well known that you could just mention it in a movie like this, and people would kind of have heard of it. That was kind of cool. All right, cool. So I guess we should start wrapping this up. I guess I'll say David Cronenberg has at least according to Wikipedia, he has another movie he's working on called Shrouds, I think. And Viggo Mortensen did say in an interview that David Cronenberg has had increasing difficulty getting his projects financed, because I think the last couple have not done well financially. So I don't know if that'll come out. But I'm always, always always interested in what he does, even though Crimes of the Future I didn't really connect with. But, I've loved a lot of his movies. Again, Videodrome, I think, is genius. The Fly, I think, is a real crowd pleaser if you haven't seen that one. And there's actually a lot of his movies I haven't seen that I'm kind of curious to see now. Like, Tom, you were saying that Naked Lunch you really like?
Oh, it is mind-blowing. Has anybody else seen it?
I haven't seen it.
No. I have seen it. It's very Cronenberg grotesque.
But not horrifying, fun.
No. Yeah. I mean, I when I watched it, I think I haven't seen it since I was like 18 or something. But it's worth a watch. It's very weird.
Yeah. I think it's astounding. And I think, almost any one of his movies, I think, just like I said, learning that he did Crash, that he did The Dead Zone, that he did Naked Lunch, that he did so many great movies.
Classic films. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's an absolute genius. If you haven't watched anything by him, start out with, like Dave said, The Fly. That's the most accessible one. And then, try some of the other ones, maybe shy away from Crimes of the Future, maybe shy away from Dead Ringers we didn't talk about because it's not science fiction, but shy away from that one as well. But, if you like being disturbed, don't shy away from those. But I'm just impressed by, number one, that he is an absolute genius. And number two, that he has merged that with an absolute mastery of craft. Because often you see one or the other, right? You see somebody who's like very workmanlike and who can produce a good movie, or you can see someone who is a genius and just is all over the place, up and down, and there's good ones and bad ones, but he is just both. And that's rare. I think that's very rare. And I think he should keep going as long as he possibly can. And the fact that he's still a genius, I mean, how old is the guy?
He's 80.
He's 80. And how long ago did he do Crimes of the Future?
Last year.
Yeah.
Last year. So I don't, maybe it's disturbing, but this is a 79-year-old or 78-year-old genius who made this movie. It's astounding that his brain still works like that. And I think he said something in your interview with him, Dave, about, look, as you get older, you think more about disease and things going wrong with your body. And so it comes out in your fiction. So I think that, maybe if you're a 78-year-old who's into really bizarre stuff, check out that movie. You would be the perfect audience for it.
I guess one other thing I'll say in favor of Crimes of the Future is that there's so few science fiction movies that come out now that aren't like franchises and that aren't like tentpole blockbusters and things.
Exactly.
Have artistic vision and are original. And this movie is definitely all of those things. It's not like a Marvel movie, and like I wasn't crazy about it, but you have to respect someone who has an artistic vision and
originality.
Doesn't just want to put out formulaic. Yeah.
Hollywood needs more of that in general, I think. Yeah, there's just too much like, let's just redo this IP that we've all seen 1,000 times. And, that I'm glad that there's some people like Cronenberg who can just take their artistic vision and get full, like free reign to create whatever they want. And sometimes you're going to have failures, but sometimes you get amazing stuff. And you need to give them the freedom to do that.
It's almost like Hollywood should, in its own best interest, fund people like Cronenberg to make these kind of groundbreaking, holy shit, I'm going to rip your subconscious apart and show you parts of your psyche you don't want to see, so that we can keep things fresh, so that, go ahead and make the Marvel movies, make a bunch of money, but let's have some kernel of gestation going on, and let's just fund Cronenberg to be there and do that, or people like it. Not that there's anybody else like him, but we need that. So it's like Hollywood should take a small percentage of what they're reaping out of this mind-numbing hash and say, okay, we're going to put this into seed, and the seed would be Cronenberg.
But this is the root of the problem with Hollywood, though. It's exactly what they don't want to do, because they want to take all the profits for themselves, and because they're all owned by corporations that are public corporations, and they have to make money to their stockholders. All that money goes back into there, which is why everything is in IP now, because it's guaranteed an audience.
But it would be in their, even if you're self-interested, it would be in their own best interest.
But they don't. That. But money people don't understand that. That's the problem. The people who are running Hollywood now are money people. They're businessmen. And they're not creatives. People who used to run Hollywood were creatives, and they liked movies. But these people are just like money. That's all it is now. And that's why we're seeing another reboot of Harry Potter and a reboot of Twilight, a reboot of everything because there is no originality, because there's risk in originality.
Let me just mention too, again, that, Cronenberg got his start with these like grants or tax exemptions or whatever they were from the Canadian government. And look at how that paid off. I mean, I don't know how much they, how much they invested in him, but like, look at how it's paid off with these, 20 feature films and, this decades long, brilliant career.
Government doesn't do that anymore either. But
they should. Is my
point. Of course, they should. A lot of things should be, but we have to. This is a reality. This is the problem with what's going on with the Writers Guild and with the SAG. Like this is all part and parcel of the problems with Hollywood and why they don't want to pay original. They don't want to pay writers. They don't want to pay anybody anything, because it's all about the money and making money for the CEOs and making money for the investors, and because they're all run by these tech companies, and it's all about constant growth. Everything has to be constant growth, but it's art. There is no constant growth in art. You can't. It's not a business that you can put some money into and you make money always, and so your business is always growing. It's not that business, but that's what they're trying to make it.
Yeah, and just speaking as a podcaster, movie reviewer, it would sure be nice if there were more original science fiction movies to talk about that were not, formulaic, that would give you more to sink your teeth into, like a David Cronenberg movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we need to start wrapping this up, but is that all? Has everyone gotten their final thoughts out, or does anyone have any other final thoughts to throw in here at the end?
No. I'm good.
I'm all set.
All right, cool. Well, let's wrap things up there. So again, we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Tom Gerencer. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Tom Gerencer for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.